Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be held hostage for 444 days in a foreign country? This was the harsh reality for 52 Americans during the Iran hostage crisis. Emerging from the turmoil of the late 70s, this crisis stretched from 1979 to 1981, marking a distressing chapter in international diplomacy. An ordeal that tested not just the resolve of those involved, but the mettle of nations. Now, let's dive into the events that led to this momentous crisis. The crisis began on November 4, 1979, when militants stormed the US Embassy in Tehran. This was a day that sent shockwaves across the globe. A group of Iranian militants, fueled by a potent mix of political unrest and religious fervor, made the audacious move to seize the US Embassy. This was no random act of violence, it was a calculated move. A direct response to the US's decision to allow the deposed Shah of Iran into the country for medical treatment. The militants associated with the Islamic Revolution were vehemently against any form of Western influence in their country. They viewed the Shah's acceptance into the United States as a blatant show of disrespect, an act that further fanned the flames of their resentment, and so they took drastic action. On that fateful day, these militants breached the embassy's walls and overpowered the Marine Guards. In a matter of hours, they had control over the entire embassy compound. The embassy staff, caught unawares, suddenly found themselves captives in their own workplace, hostages to a cause they were only tangentially connected to. Back in Washington, the news of the embassy seizure was met with a mix of shock and outrage. The US government, under the leadership of President Jimmy Carter, was caught in a precarious situation. They needed to ensure the safety of the hostages, but they also needed to handle the situation delicately to prevent an escalation into a full-blown war. The immediate response was to cut off diplomatic relations with Iran. The US also imposed a series of economic sanctions and trade embargoes, hoping to pressure the Iranian government into releasing the hostages. But these measures did little to sway the determined militants. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control, and with no immediate solution in sight, the crisis would drag on for more than a year. With 52 American lives hanging in the balance, the US government had to act fast. But as the world would soon discover, resolving this crisis was anything but straightforward. The US government faced a daunting task: negotiating the release of the hostages. Imagine a chessboard with its pieces representing the intricate web of negotiations between the United States and Iran. Each move, each decision, was a calculated strategy aimed at bringing the hostages home. At the heart of these negotiations were Iran's demands and the financial compensation proposed by the US. Iran's demands were far from straightforward. They included non-interference in Iran's affairs, the return of the Shah's wealth to Iran, and the release of frozen Iranian assets in US banks. It was a complex set of requests that required the US to tread a delicate diplomatic line. On the one hand, the US was desperate to secure the release of the hostages. On the other, it was hesitant to set a precedent of capitulating to such demands. Negotiating the financial compensation was another intricate dance. The US had to consider the political and economic implications of such a move. It was a delicate balance of offering a sum that would satisfy Iran without seeming to reward hostage-taking. The solution was found in the Algiers Accords, a set of agreements that included the release of $7 billion of frozen Iranian assets. As the negotiations progressed, the stakes remained high. The lives of 52 Americans hung in the balance, their fate tied to the outcome of a high-stakes diplomatic poker game. The US government faced intense pressure at home and internationally to resolve the crisis, all while navigating the complex geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. The negotiations were a test of the US's diplomatic prowess, a test of patience, strategy, and the ability to navigate complex international relations. It was a task that required careful consideration, strategic planning, and a deep understanding of Iran's political landscape. The negotiations were a high-stakes game of diplomacy and strategy, with the lives of 52 Americans at stake. The path to the release of the hostages was fraught with challenges, but through careful negotiation and strategic diplomacy, the US government was able to secure their release and bring an end to the crisis. Finally, on January 20th, 1981, the hostages were released. This marked the end of a tense and grueling period that had lasted a staggering 444 days. The release of the hostages was a moment of collective relief and triumph, not only for the hostages and their families, but for the entire United States. The role of the newly elected Reagan administration in securing the release of the hostages cannot be overstated. Reagan's administration had been in office for less than a day when the hostages were freed, a testament to the administration's commitment to resolving the crisis. The negotiations, which had been ongoing for months, culminated in a series of agreements and financial compensation from the US, satisfying some of Iran's demands. The reaction in the United States was one of overwhelming relief and joy. Families were reunited and the hostages returned to a hero's welcome. The nation exhaled a collective sigh of relief, the weight of the past 444 days finally lifting. Yet, this moment of triumph was also a stark reminder of the need for improved intelligence and security measures to prevent similar incidents in the future. The end of the Iran hostage crisis also marked a significant turning point in US-Iran relations. It underscored the complexities and the volatility of international politics and the delicate balance of power that exists between nations. The crisis had significant consequences for both countries. For the US, it was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of its vulnerabilities and the need for strategic diplomacy. For Iran, the end of the crisis marked a turning point in the country's post-revolutionary trajectory. It was a moment of assertion, but it also set the stage for further political and economic upheaval in the years that followed. The crisis and its resolution highlighted the complexities of Iran's relationship with the West and the challenges that lay ahead. The end of the Iran hostage crisis marked a turning point in US-Iran relations, with significant consequences for both countries. It's a chapter in history that continues to shape the dynamics of international relations today. The Iran hostage crisis was a pivotal moment in history. We've journeyed together from the crisis's shocking inception, where 52 Americans were held captive for a staggering 444 days, through the tense negotiations, all the way to the ultimate release of the hostages. This crisis, a testament to the endurance of the human spirit, also underlines the importance of diplomacy, negotiation, and international relations in our interconnected world.